Montana winters were not for the faint-hearted. The air cut your lungs like glass, the snow swallowed sound like a ghost, and the nights stretched on like old regrets. The people of Dry Creek had long accepted the rules of this land: silence, survival, and staying out of each other's business. But one rule towered above all: outsiders don't belong. And Arthur Bishop was an outsider, in every sense. No one really saw him move into the old Walker property by the pines. One morning it was vacant. The next, there was smoke curling from the chimney. Locals whispered he bought it cash, no mortgage, no questions. They said he lived alone, with an old retriever, and never came into town unless he needed fuel or meat. He wasn't unfriendly. He simply wasn't. The first time he walked into Darla's market, he barely said 3 words. He bought black coffee, nails, kerosene, and dog food. The girl at the counter, 17, purple hair, nose ring, looked up and said, "Morning." Arthur only nodded. "New in town?" she asked. Another nod. "Well," she said, tapping the register, "welcome to Dry Creek. You're not missing much." He left without a word. People noticed, especially those who didn't like being unnoticed. Dry Creek was the kind of place where grudges outlived people. It was scarred by logging disputes, pipeline debates, and rumors of abandoned mines filled with toxic water. But more than that, it had a deep generational fear of the unknown. And Arthur Bishop was a man full of unknowns. He kept to himself. Mornings began before dawn. He chopped wood with mechanical precision, cooked oatmeal in silence, fed his dog Duke, and read battered paperbacks by the fire. At night, he walked the perimeter of his land. No flashlight, no gun. Just instinct. He had the look of a man who had seen too much and said too little. That made people nervous. It started small. It always does. One afternoon, Arthur was loading firewood into his truck behind Darla's market when Chase Walker, 26, local mechanic, ex-football burnout, pulled up in his lifted Ford, stereo thumping. Chase had inherited the charm of his father, the town's retired sheriff, but none of the discipline. Where his father enforced rules, Chase created them. He parked sideways across 2 spots, killing the engine with a rev. "Look at this," he muttered to his buddies, eyeing Arthur. "Paul Bunyan reborn." Arthur didn't look up. "Hey, old man," Chase called out. "You just gonna steal our forest, or you gonna wave to your neighbors?" Arthur picked up another log, calm as ever. Chase spat near his boots. "I asked you something." Arthur finally glanced over, his voice low and firm. "I don't answer to men who act like boys." Chase's eyes flared, but his friends pulled him back, chuckling. "Come on, man. Let the lumber wizard live." Arthur left without another word. Duke sat obediently in the passenger seat, panting softly. That night, Chase posted a photo on social media, a blurry shot of Arthur loading his truck. 3 days later, it snowed hard. Dry Creek disappeared under a white blanket. Roads iced over, schools closed, everyone huddled indoors, everyone except Arthur. He loved the silence, the kind only a storm could bring. Duke bounded ahead of him, tail wagging, nose buried in snowbanks. They walked the trail behind his property, the same one he used to mark his trees. When they returned at dusk, Arthur lit the stove and poured kibble into Duke's bowl. The dog ate happily, then curled by the fire. Arthur sat with a notebook, flipping through names. Some crossed out, some underlined. That's when he heard it. A whimper. He turned. Duke was no longer by the fire. "Duke!" he called, rising. Outside, snow still fell. His footprints were clear in the powder, and beside them, smaller prints. Human. Fresh. He followed the trail around the cabin. What he found made his stomach clench. Duke was there, barely breathing. Blood stained his golden coat. His eyes, once cloudy but kind, looked up at Arthur with quiet pain. Next to him in the snow, a hunting knife, and a piece of cardboard with red spray paint. "This town don't want ghosts." Arthur lifted Duke into his arms and ran back to the cabin. He stayed up all night, tending to the wounds. But by morning, Duke was gone. No howls, no rage, just stillness. He buried his only friend behind the cabin, a grave marked with a pine wood cross. Then he lit a fire. Not in the stove, in his heart. The days after Duke's death passed in a numb blur. Arthur no longer ventured into town. No grocery runs, no firewood drops. He sat inside the cabin, lights off, fire low, watching the trees sway through a frost-covered window. At night, he sharpened his axe. Not because he needed it, but because it felt like control. He replayed the footprints in the snow, the message, the way Duke has whispered one final time, trusting him. That trust cut deeper than any knife. But this wasn't grief. It was preparation. Search instead for the days after Duke's death passed in a numb blur. Arthur no longer ventured into town. No grocery runs, no firewood drops. He sat inside the cabin, lights off, fire low, watching the trees sway through a frost-covered window. At night, he sharpened his axe, not because he needed it, but because it felt like control. He replayed the footprints in the snow, the message, the way Duke had whimpered one final time, trusting him. That trust cut deeper than any knife. But this wasn't grief. It was preparation. Underneath the floorboards, behind the cellar's second beam, was a lockbox. Arthur had not opened it in nearly a decade. Now he did. Inside, a military patch faded with time. A USB drive, a photo of 7 soldiers in desert fatigues, standing beneath a tattered American flag, and a sealed envelope marked, "Gray Fall, Unreleased Debrief." Arthur didn't need to read it again. He'd written most of it, but what caught his eye this time was a name scribbled on the back of the photo in pencil. C. Walker, Civilian Support, Phobe, Asmar. His hands froze. Chase Walker's father had been there, at Asmar Forward Operating Base, the same base where Arthur's team had carried out a controversial extraction mission in 2003. The same base that was buried under 10 feet of classified files and silence. That mission had ended in blood, fire, and a public scandal. Arthur took the photo to the firelight. The man next to the soldiers was younger, clean-cut, but it was him, Sheriff Carl Walker. Arthur didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he walked out of the cabin, eyes sunken but clear. He grabbed his axe and hiked deeper into the woods than he had in years. There, he marked a line on the bark of a tree, then began cutting. Not for firewood, for focus. Every strike was a memory, every crack of splintering pine, a scream buried under classified ink. He wasn't just mourning Duke. He was remembering what it felt like to become dangerous again. In town, people began to talk. "Have you seen the woods behind Walker's place? Something's happening out there. Why are the lights in the forest on all night? I heard he used to be military. The spooky kind." Chase pretended to shrug it off, but he felt it, in the twitch behind his left eye, in the way his fingers trembled when gripping a steering wheel. Whatever ghost he had stabbed in the snow hadn't died. It was sharpening its teeth. 3 days later, a black sedan rolled up to Darla's diner. The driver, Michael Crane, late 40s, academic, journalist, and independent war crimes researcher. He carried a small laptop bag, a leather notebook, and a face that looked like it hasn't smiled since the Cold War. He ordered black coffee, asked for the town map, and circled a spot near the woods. "Looking for someone?" Darla asked, cautious. Michael nodded. "Arthur Bishop." She stiffened. "Don't know him." Michael smiled. Not kindly, just knowingly. "Well, maybe he knows me." He left a card on the counter. On it, Michael Crane, International Military Archives and Justice Review. Because secrets don't stay buried. It was late afternoon when Arthur heard the knock. 3 taps. Spaced, deliberate. He didn't move at first. But when the voice came through, calm, intelligent, confident, he stood, Arthur Bishop, you don't know me, but I've known you for a very long time. The door creaked open. Michael stood on the porch, unmoving. Arthur's eyes narrowed. You're a bit overdressed for Montana, he said. Michael cracked half a grin. You're underdressed for a man carrying that much guilt. Arthur didn't invite him in, but Michael stepped inside anyway. They sat across from each other, like two old predators meeting by the river. Michael, you were the last person to walk out of Asmar before the fire. You gave the kill order that took down Building 6. You signed the waiver on air support, and you, Arthur, disappeared before the trials. Arthur, is this about justice? Michael, it's about memory, about the people who didn't get a trial, who didn't get to leave. Arthur said nothing. Michael opened his laptop, loaded a video file, footage from a drone, grainy, time-stamped. Building 6 explosions. Chaos. A small child running through smoke. Arthur looked away. Michael, you were right. The evac code was late. You weren't told civilians were inside, but the ones who buried the truth still walk free. He paused. Including Sheriff Carl Walker. Arthur's eyes snapped back. Walker lied to Congress. He doctored mission logs. He made you the scapegoat. Arthur leaned forward. Why are you here now? Michael shut the laptop. Because Chase Walker doesn't know any of that, but he's becoming exactly the kind of man his father was. And someone has to stop it before history repeats itself. Arthur got up. History never repeats. It just gets meaner. That night, the forest didn't sleep. Arthur stood at the edge of the tree line, eyes fixed on the faint glow from town. Darla's market, the bar, the mechanic shop. Lives moving on as if nothing had happened, as if his dog was not buried behind the cabin, as if war didn't echo in his bones. Michael Crane had left just before dusk, said he'd be in touch, said he'd submit the article, with or without Arthur's consent. Arthur didn't argue. He just asked one question. What if the truth makes things worse? Michael replied, truth doesn't make things worse. It just makes things real. Chase Walker hadn't been sleeping either. He'd been having dreams, not about Arthur, but about his father. He remembered the desert, vague flashes from when he was a kid, his father yelling into radios, soldiers calling him civilian VIP. Guns, helicopters, a woman crying in a tent. He remembered one thing most clearly, a soldier kneeling down beside him, pressing a chocolate bar into his hand and whispering, I'm sorry you saw that. He never knew who the man was, until he saw Arthur Bishop walk into town last month. The memory hit like thunder. That was him, the ghost from Asmar. And now, he was here. Chase gathered his boys, Jared, Boone, and Dex, 4 trucks, 2 crates of fireworks, a gas can, and a plan. Smoke him out, break his windows, let him know he's not welcome. If he swings, we swing back harder. Chase, this guy's not normal, Jared muttered. Chase sneered, neither am I. Arthur knew they were coming. He'd been watching the road, studying tire tracks, placing trail cams, counting steps between trees. He wasn't preparing to kill anyone. He was preparing to survive without killing. He laid out rope, planted sound alarms, dug trenches in the snow like he had in Kandahar. Everything had a purpose. Every step had intent. This wasn't war. It was discipline. At 2:43 a.m., the first truck headlights appeared on the ridge. Then another, then 2 more. They didn't bother cutting the engines. The roar shattered the forest silence. Arthur stood in front of his cabin, arms at his sides, calm, still. Like a storm just before it touches down, Chase stepped out, baseball bat in hand. Chase, this is the end of the line, old man. Arthur didn't flinch. You don't know where your line starts. The other boys fanned out. Arthur raised one hand. Not as a threat, as a pause. You're not mad at me, he said. You're mad at your father, and he's not here to hit back. Chase's jaw tightened. He told me you were a coward. Arthur took a step forward. He told the world I was a criminal, so he could retire in peace and raise you in a lie. Chase rushed him. Arthur sidestepped. Classic military disarm. He didn't punch. He redirected. Didn't injure. He disabled. Dex swung a bat. Arthur ducked, twisted his arm behind his back, and shoved him into a snowbank. Boone tried to tackle him. Arthur let him fall into a trench, knocking the wind from his lungs. Jared stood frozen. Chase came back again, this time with a knife. He slashed, wild, emotional. Arthur caught his wrist, twisted it, and dropped him to his knees. Held him there, breathing hard. Arthur, I held your hand once, gave you chocolate, told you I was sorry. You were a kid. You didn't deserve that war. Chase looked up, tears mixing with fury. You killed them. You pushed the button. Arthur closed his eyes. I followed orders. Your father wrote them. Silence, heavy, crushing. Arthur stepped back, dropped the knife at Chase's feet. Walk away, or stay and learn who you really are. The boys retreated. No one spoke. Arthur didn't follow them. Instead, he sat on the cabin steps, watched the sky turn from black to pale gray. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow, like forgiveness. He didn't feel peace, but he didn't feel hunted either. That was enough. The next morning, Michael Crane returned with a camera crew. Arthur met them outside. Michael, ready to talk? Arthur nodded. Record everything. Don't leave out the ugly parts. Even the classified. Especially the classified. Michael opened the mic, and for the first time in 20 years, Arthur Bishop spoke, not in defense, not in anger, but in truth. He told the story of Asmar Base, of the orders, the mistakes, the bodies, the children. He told the story of a man who tried to escape justice and failed, and of a boy who tried to inherit vengeance and almost succeeded. It took less than 48 hours for the interview to go viral. The Ghost of Asmar Speaks read the headline across hundreds of independent media sites. It was raw, unedited. Michael Crane kept his promise. No filters, no narrative bending. Just the truth. The footage was brutal. Arthur Bishop sitting stiffly in a flannel coat, voice steady, eyes hollow. He named names, showed the documents, described every detail of the 2003 Asmar mission, the evacuation delay, the faulty intel, the airstrike authorization, and the civilians who never made it out. His voice cracked only once when he described the girl in the yellow dress. He didn't know her name. He remembered she had dirt on her cheeks and braids in her hair. He remembered carrying her body out after the flames died. She didn't scream, he said. She just stared at me like she was already gone. That clip alone was shared over 6 million times. Within days, mainstream outlets picked it up. Talk shows, podcasts, congressional hearings. Everyone had an opinion. War hero or war criminal? Another pawn of the system, finally breaking silence. Why did the military bury this for 20 years? Some called Arthur a monster. Others, a whistleblower. A few, veterans mostly, called him a mirror. A reflection of everything they feared they might become, or already were. Back in Dry Creek, the impact was quieter, but sharper. People at the diner turned their heads when Arthur entered. Some whispered, some stared. A few left their coffee and walked out. But others stayed. Darla, the girl at the register, was the first to speak. You really did all that? She asked one morning. Arthur nodded. Would you do it again? No. Would you tell someone else to? Arthur took a sip of his black coffee. Only if they could carry the weight forever. She didn't say anything else, but the next day, she served him pie. On the house. Chase hadn't been seen for a week. When he finally showed up at Arthur's cabin, it was mid-afternoon. Snow had started melting. Mud clung to his boots. He didn't knock. Arthur was splitting wood behind the house. The axe stopped mid-swing when he saw him. They stood in silence for a full minute. Chase, my dad saw your interview. Threw the remote through the TV. Arthur wiped sweat from his brow. Waited. Chase sat on a stump. He told me not to believe you.
That you were just trying to cover your own ass. Arthur leaned on the axe handle. What do you believe? Chase looked down at his boots. I don't know. I just know I hated you for things I didn't understand. Another long silence. Then, I'm sorry about the dog. Arthur's jaw clenched just a bit. He was better than most people I've met. I know, Chase whispered. They didn't shake hands, didn't hug. But when Chase left, he didn't slam the door. He walked slowly, like he was finally carrying the right weight. A week later, a letter arrived by post. No return address, just a single line inside, typed, I watched your story. I was there too. You're not alone. E.L. Arthur folded it carefully, placed it in the lockbox beside the military patch. For the first time in years, he didn't seal it shut. Spring arrived late in Dry Creek. The snow receded. Birds returned, and at the edge of the woods, a new wooden post stood beside an old grave. Duke's. Arthur stood beside it, hammering a fresh plaque. It read, He kept me human. Michael Crane returned one last time. No cameras, no team, just 2 coffees and a notebook. You think people will forgive you? He asked. Arthur shook his head. That's not what I want. Then what? Arthur looked out at the trees. To die, knowing the truth, wasn't buried with me. Michael paused. You think they'll bury your story? Arthur smiled, faint and tired. Stories don't die, only the ones who live them.